on, we have Alexander Thomas from the UK. He is going to be talking about made to order apps, which I think he would be in a better position to explain. We'll have Alex join us.
Hey there.
Good day to you, Alex. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. Bit chilly, but I'm okay. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. Just as a small introduction, Alexander Thomas. Alex likes to call himself a React Native extremist. I do not know why. He is the creator of Mapsy, which is a tool that has something to do with GPS. I'm not saying anything. I want him to tell you about it. And he loves to open source new things on GitHub in React Native repeatedly. Uh, so, Alex, welcome. Thank you for being here,
Thank you for
and
having me.
I will let you take it away.
Right, let's do it. I'll just share my screen. Right. Okay, so hopefully that's coming through to you guys now. There we go. Big infinity screen. Let's do this. So hi everyone. Right before I get started, I'd just like to give a huge thanks to Geekyans for inviting me to talk today. I love React Native. I love this technology, so it's a really great honor to be here to talk to you all. And also, I'd really like to thank them for Native Base as well. It is such an awesome UI framework. It has saved me countless hours back in production during my development. So I really appreciate you guys open sourcing it. So just a brief introduction. Hi, I'm Alex. I'm based in the UK, and I've been developing in React Native for around 3.5 years now. And if you follow me on Twitter or on GitHub, you know that I publish a ridiculous amount of React Native open source, to the point that you might start to think I have a kind of problem. I'm like addicted to doing it. What I'm here to talk to you about today is what we call made to order apps. And I really want to cover kind of two main themes in this presentation. The first is just sort of the conventional sort of challenges and decisions that you have to make when you're working on a made to order app. And secondly, I just want to really emphasize what a tremendous technology React Native is for building a made to order app. So just as a nice baseline, because you probably sat there wondering, what is a made to order app? Like, what is he talking about? What is a made to order app? The way that I like to think of it is that it's our kind of standard native application, except we offset as much of the sort of style and presentation and configuration element to the API as we can. So the reason we do this is because we can essentially offset all of the kind of like stylistic and presentational content way past compilation is finished. So what that means is that you can basically restyle and reconfigure your application a lot while it's in production without actually having to make a new application build. The reason you design an application like this is because they're actually extremely good sources of revenue. So there's two main reasons for this. The first is that you can essentially offer a client a really bespoke look and feel. So an app which is going to properly convey their brand theme and their sort of company identity. But you can offer it at a fraction of the price that it would be to have the exact same app, but built from the ground up. And the reason that it's so cheap by comparison is because you effectively get to keep selling the exact same code. So you put the same amount of development effort into designing your application, but you can just keep selling it multiple times to multiple different customers because it can essentially be rethemed and reconfigured so they look visually distinct from one another, which means that in terms of your delivery, there's a lot more value in the features that you deliver as opposed to just writing one feature that's only ever going to be in one app. Another really interesting property about a made-to-order app is that the analytics are quite rich in the sense that if you're given essentially the same core code base to lots of different user bases who are using it in slightly different operational contexts, because your clients might be slightly different, you get to see how your application really uses and varies between these kind of contexts. So you get really rich sort of analytics and understanding about your user's experience, and also it helps drive new features as well. It's also a really nice design in the sense as well that, if you're building a feature for one customer, it's quite likely that other customers will like it too. So you're constantly providing value to everybody who has your application. Now, the way these traditionally work, and this is if you are working on a made-to-order app at the moment, this is probably how you do it. You boot up your application, it hits your API, and it says, "Hey, I'm this customer today. Give me all of the information I need to look and present the feel of being this customer's app." And the API will essentially send you a bunch of configuration data, so usually just some JSON, that the app will assign to all of the views and things like that, all behind a splash screen, so a user actually won't see any of this happening. And then once all that's been assigned, the splash screen gets dismissed, and then the user's left with what feels like a bespoke custom app. One of the things to really emphasize is that you want to minimize the total number of compiled assets and styles as possible. You want to place as much emphasis on having a configurable API to return this information for you, because you want to really reduce the amount of time you're going to have to make another build whenever a customer wants to be able to change something little. You got to think that if you're reselling the same app, and because it's a lot cheaper, you can sell it to far more customers. Obviously, your operational difficulties increase if one customer wants to have a change. You really don't want to damage your sprint by having to make a new compile build for them. It all sounds really good from the top level, but I should emphasize that there are some caveats to making a made-to-order app. Most notably is that feature parity is traditionally extremely difficult. So, if you're giving some style information to both an Android platform and an iOS platform, the operating system or the developer, and let's be honest, it's normally the developer, can have some opinionated decisions on how to interpret particular style flags, which can lead sometimes to ambiguity in the presentation content, but also functionally as well. So that has been quite difficult to manage. Additionally, complexity scales with configurability. So if you really, really want to create an application which truly identifies with your customer's brand, it means that there's a lot of very fine tuning that's required to make sure that that branding conveys itself appropriately. And now, when we think that every single style key that we use that's served from the API into our app has to be parsed and validated and sanitized and cached, propagated into our view, and then finally causing a re-render, you realize that that's actually quite a significant engineering challenge to maintain. And if you're really trying to reflect a customer's brand with all these minor keys, that becomes quite a complicated thing to do. And possibly worst of all is that this sort of approach requires your front-end developer to talk to your back-end database admin about the minutiae of front-end design, which is a conversation which can only go badly. But it's no secret that React Native has actually solved a lot of these issues, most notably maintaining feature parity. Because when we're talking about React Native being a cross-platform language, when we're accepting style information and propagating it into our views, we're all defining that really in a business logic kind of layer using cross-platform JavaScript, meaning that there's very little case where this sort of presentational ambiguity comes from anymore. Additionally, the style sheet that React Native provides is so comprehensive and broad, and you can really achieve quite some powerful effects, like the other presenters have shown us. And the fact that these are all presented using, using component props, which fundamentally is just like can be considered primitive JSON objects. It means that your API can actually serve these, and your app can consume them very easily because they're effectively talking the same language. So it means you can really open a very wide scale of configurability quite simply. Additionally, when we use the React context as a theme provider, it becomes almost trivial to expose this quite deep level of customization to deeply nested child components of your app. So no matter how small the style changes you want to do to, no matter how deep a component, you can pretty much have the guarantee that React Native is going to propagate those changes for you reliably. So it's extremely awesome. So you're probably saying right now, okay, I get it. Styling's easy in React Native. You're talking a bit too much about styling. And if you think that, you're right. I would say that made-to-order apps have traditionally always been about this kind of simple, kind of high-level styling in terms of giving a color palette to your app or providing some simple Boolean switches for feature toggles and simple text overrides. And I think that's simply because that the state of the technology as it used to be was quite restrictive. And I'm talking about the kind of technology where you had to worry about what thread you're on when you're assigning like a button handler, that kind of thing. But by contrast, when you're making a made-to-order app these days with React Native, it's no longer this kind of superficial, simplistic thing. React Native is just so malleable and so powerful that we can actually achieve some really interesting levels of bespoke API-defined configuration, which I'm not sure has ever really been seen before. So I know that's a big statement, so I'm going to try and back it up. So what I want to do is I want to talk through what I think are the three key principles that I think are going to go in to generate the next sort of generation of made-to-order applications. So the first is that everything can be a client decision. So to properly understand this, I need to use an example. So when you're making a made-to-order app, a really simple way to add configurability to your clients is by using some kind of placeholder image, and you'll say, I'll use this image, and then I will take some URL defined by the API, and I'll use that URL contents to populate my image. And then from the outset, it seems like you've introduced like a reasonable level of configurability. However, there's been a hidden assumption that's easy to skip over, and it's that your client may not necessarily want to have an image there. They might want to have an animation or some text or a video. And by forcing it to be an image, you've constrained what your client can really do with your app. You've limited their flexibility. They can't convey their brand as effectively. So in React Native, we can work around this using something called the URI box. So the perceptive among you will notice that if I'm passing a source prop with a URI set to an image URL, this component's likely going to render an image. And if you guess that, you're right. But what's special about the URI box is that you can additionally specify a lookup table. The lookup table essentially relates content types or MIME types to React components, meaning that when your URI is passed, it is efficiently query to determine what the content type is of the URL provider. And then via the lookup table, it will try to find the equivalent component. So in this instance, you can see I've given it an image URL. So I think by default, the URI box it's always going to default to an image content type. But if we were to provide a video of type MP4, then it would choose to render a video component in place. So you would still be sort of using this sort of generic view that you know can be configured by the API, but you know it's going to consistently render whatever content's been pulled back from the back end. So it's quite interesting how we're able to sort of embed a lot more configurability and flexibility in just a single style key. From your API, because normally, you know, to achieve a similar kind of thing, you probably have to make your return data a little more complicated. So you might have to say, yeah, I'm giving this URL, by the way, this is video, by the way, this is an animation, that kind of thing. So it makes it a lot easier for us from that perspective. Next, a really interesting approach is making the unconfigurable configurable. So I mentioned previously that you really want to minimize the total number of like hard sort of compiled builds you want to make when you're developing a made-to-order app. So it means that you really want to look very closely at the things you are saying have to be a dedicated compile dependency, and really testing that assumption and trying to work out whether or not we can actually opt to serve these things from the back end instead. So a great example of this is that it's almost what I believe a platitude in React Native that a font has to be bundled in your application, right? If you want to use a custom font, you have to change the iOS plist and you have to paste a font file in your Android's assets directory. But if we use React Native custom fonts, we can very easily declare a custom fonts provider and place that at the root of our application. We can specify a font faces object, which is really high level font family definitions. So you'll see the syntax matches really closely to what we use in conventional font styling, except we've added an additional URI field. Now that URI is going to point to some remote location on your network. So, and hopefully it would be like a CDN. And then the custom font provider is actually going to manage the downloading of that font file, the caching of that font file, and then sort of hooking it up to your application at runtime. To access the custom fonts, all we have to do is use the custom font hook. We give it the high-level font name that we've got. So from our theme, we said, right, I want to use H1. And what use custom font will do is basically give us all of the sort of mechanisms we need to be able to assign the custom font theme, custom font family to this text component at the point it gets downloaded. You'll be interested to probably know that this isn't just for the React Native text component. You can also use it on a text import. And if you'll notice as well, we're actually using the text component from native base. So it's really any native component which has the sort of text view type that we can interact with this library. And finally, I really want to emphasize when delivering a made-to-order application, in the future, we really need to start thinking about the fact that layout is config. So what I mean by this is that if you have competing customers with the same made-to-order app, and it does happen, if you place those applications side by side, you can pretty much tell that they're the same app, but they've just got a different skin. Partly that comes to because of the fact that obviously because of these restricted tools we've only been able to apply kind of superficial levels of customization. But I think what gives it away is the fact the layouts are consistent. So if a customer approaches you and your application has sort of like a hamburger menu and they say, I don't want that, I want to have a toolbar instead. The simplistic approach that you'd have to take with restrictive tools is like you'd say, well, we could add an enum to our API response to say, okay, use burger layout or use the toolbar. But all we do when we respond with a solution like that is we just complicate the matters. We have to kind of come around to the realization that nothing we ever do is really going to satisfy the customer. They always want a precise level of control, which is very hard to manage in a compiled build. It means that lots of Boolean toggles and switches and giant if statements to get the right level. And that's something that doesn't scale. But it does if we treat layout as config. So in this example, I'm using a library called Propertier, which supports both React and React Native. And what Propertier allows us to do is if we define a lookup table again, this time it is just filled with React components, we can give it a child property, which is a JSON object. And I'd just like to take a moment to emphasize that if we really look at this object, there's nothing dynamic or runtime going on in here. So for all intents and purposes, this is something that could just be served from a backend API. And you'll notice it uses the convention where an underscore represents a component type and a dollar represents an array of children. So you'll see that this view component has the child text component and a child URI box. So you probably notice at this stage that we're kind of getting to that level of kind of wild flexibility. You'll also notice as well that any other prop that isn't one of these two kind of reserved properties just gets treated as a regular prop for the component. So you see our view component has a style prop. Now, when this response or this JSON object is passed into Propertier, it's going to render it dynamically on the fly, meaning that in this example, we're going to have a bright blue background, which sends us the text hello world and gives us a URI box image underneath. This is obviously a simplistic example, but I would like to note that in our lookup table, I've left this comment to emphasize that these don't have to be simple components. You could just as easily have stateful sort of application aware components like those that have been connected to Redux. So I do want to emphasize that it is actually possible to write an entire application this way. I know it sounds crazy, but I've done it and it's quite surprising to see that it works. So I would just like to summarize and say that I really want everyone to take away that React Native has made make to order easy. It has been really difficult over the past few years to achieve kind of this level of configuration, but it's truly made it effortless by comparison to how it used to be. I'm a single developer now, and I'm maintaining like the Android and the iOS versions of a made to order app, and using traditional approaches, using like a separate Java developer and a Objective-C developer. It's crazy amounts of work compared to what it used to be. And secondly, React Native makes made to order powerful. I hope what I've been able to show you from these open source repositories has emphasized that a little bit. And so that's it. I want to thank everyone for listening. If you like what I talk about, please follow me on Twitter and GitHub. I'm doing this kind of stuff all the time. And yeah, I'd love to hear your feedback and answer any questions you may have.
Alex, that was amazing. Short and sweet, just like everybody likes it.
I don't even
Um,
know how long it was. I'm not sure if I just blurted everything out or.
oh no, you did just fine. Uh, so we don't really have any questions related to what you were talking about per se, but there was one question by one of our viewers. They're asking if there is a way to decrease the APK size that they're generating.
Yeah, I think that well, again, if you're using a made-to-order app, right, you're not really having to embed as many sort of compiled assets as you would have to do originally. It focuses a lot more on caching and things like that. So, your APK size is reduced in that sense because you're going to be pulling that kind of information far past the application's been installed. The only other thing I can really say on top of that is that you really have to try and make sure to really stay on top of the assets that you do use in your app, because I think code and libraries, like they're not really contributing that much to the size of an application compared to static assets like videos or images. And it's very easy to get into the habit of like pulling an image into your project and maybe not liking it but still leaving it there. And I think a lot of applications do end up making it to production with that approach. So you can see kind of like your memory debt increase from that perspective quite easily, I believe.
Right. I hope that answers his question and solves his doubts. One thing that I want to mention here is that I am truly surprised by the amount of usage that native base has. I mean, we were just trying to be really humble about it, but I think we should start boasting just a little because everybody is using it, and that
It's
makes us
awesome.
that makes it so much better.
I think it
Anyway,
like native basis, it's really nailed that, like, because when you pull in a UI framework, you're making a bit of a commitment and you don't know whether it's going to really behave the way you want it to. But native base is one of the few frameworks that I've seen where it's so simple to get exactly the kind of layouts that you're going for. And additionally, like that cross-platform like security, like it works with React Native Web as well. Like it's phenomenal. It's a really good job, you guys.
thank you so much. And while we were talking about native base, we have two more questions for you if you have the time.
Cool. That's fine. Yeah, absolutely.
Our fellow speaker Samip just asked, it's not really React Native related, but what software are you using for presenting, Alex?
Yeah, guys, I'm using React. Come on. So what I'm using is a really cool library called MDX Deck, and basically you use Markdown to separate your slides, but it works in the way that you can also embed React components in there, so you can just you can use all the familiar syntax that you want, and all the animations I had were pulled from Lottie animations, which are all open source and nice. So yeah, honestly, I'm surprised not that many people really know about it because MDX Deck is just so awesome. You can do whatever you want really easily.
Well, some of that kind of turned out to be a React Native question, so kudos on that. Anyway, Alex, thank you so much for being here. Stick around till the end of the
Yeah,
show,
no worries. Thank you very much
and
for
we'll
having
move
me. I
on.
really
Thank you.
appreciate it, guys. Thank you.